Here's what nobody tells you about flying through the eye wall of a Category 4 hurricane. It's not the turbulence. It's not the noise. Though the noise is extraordinary, a sound like the sky deciding to have an opinion about your presence in it. It's that somewhere around past 3, you stop being afraid of the storm, and you start being afraid of something else entirely. My name is Lev Carr, Lieutenant Colonel, Air Force Reserve, 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, Keesler Air Force Base, Biloxi, Mississippi. I have been flying WC-130J hurricane missions for 10 years. I have been through the eye wall of Category 2, 3, 4, and one very memorable Category 5 storm. I fly with a precision that is not about fear. Fear is counterproductive in an eye wall, but about respect. Storm what the storm will do. Your job is to be ready. Here is what I want to tell you about 6 hours after we landed from the Hurricane Vera mission. I want to tell you about that first, before the mission itself, because that's where I finally understood the shape of the thing I'd been carrying for 2 years. 6 hours after we landed, I was standing outside the NOAA sensor data room at 2300 and the lights were still on inside. I could see him through the glass. Cael Nori, NOAA atmospheric scientist, dropsonde system specialist, the person who had been sitting 4 feet behind me on 12 hurricane missions. He was still running analysis. The storm had already made landfall. The data was transmitted. He was still in there. I stood there with my coffee for approximately 45 seconds, and I thought, I have been flying through Category 4 storms for 10 years, and I waited 2 years to knock on that glass. I knocked. He looked up. This is the story of how we got there. Cael Nori had been attached to the 53rd for 2 years when Hurricane Vera formed, which meant I had 12 missions of context for how he operated. 12 data points. I note this because he is a scientist and would appreciate the framing, and because I had been, for 2 years, collecting data on a question I did not want to formally acknowledge I was asking. Here is what the data showed. He was 31 years old with a PhD from University of Miami's Atmospheric Science program. He wore reading glasses that he took off when he was truly concentrating and put back on when he wanted people to think he was concentrating. 2 distinctly different situations. He had a habit of narrating dropsonde data to himself as it came in, not loudly, just under his breath, a quiet commentary I could hear through the intercom when the flight deck was otherwise quiet. He forgot meals. He had a laugh that was entirely at odds with his professional register, sudden, specific, genuinely delighted. And it was always audible from the cockpit, and I had always been aware of exactly when it happened. The question I was not formally asking was whether any of this was reciprocal. The data was inconclusive. I had maintained appropriate professional distance. The Air Force Reserve and NOAA have a functional working relationship that does not benefit from complication. I am a lieutenant colonel with command responsibility. Cael is federal contract, and none of this is a framework that makes the following question appropriate. What does it mean when someone's voice in the intercom has become the thing you orient around in a storm? 12 missions. Inconclusive result. Professional framework maintained with what I would describe, in retrospect, as excessive effort. And then Hurricane Vera formed. The pre-mission briefing was 0400 Tuesday. Category 3, 115 knot sustained winds, central pressure 946 millibars, moving northwest at 11 knots, landfall projected somewhere between Morgan City, Louisiana and Bay St. Louis, Mississippi within 36 hours. Standard mission. We'd done it 12 times. Cael arrived at 0358, 2 minutes early, which was notable, and he had that specific quality of alertness that comes from spending time looking at something that surprised you. He sat down, opened his laptop, did not look at me. "She's doing something interesting," he said. To the laptop. "Define interesting," said our flight meteorologist, Dion Ray. "Rapid intensification potential. Sea surface temperatures are running 2 degrees warmer than the model used." He turned the laptop so Dion could see the SST chart. "If she starts eye wall contraction before our first pass, the penetration conditions will be different from what the brief expects." "How different?" He looked at his screen. "Category 4 different." A brief silence in the briefing room. "The brief says Category 3, I said. "The brief was prepared 6 hours ago." He looked at me then, directly, reading glasses off. "I'm telling you what the current data suggests." I held his gaze. Noted, I said. We brief for Category 3 and anticipate escalation. He nodded, glasses back into the laptop. I spent the next 12 minutes running modified weather minimums for a Category 4 penetration in my head and trying not to look at the door of the data room through the briefing room window. Wheels up at 0512. I want to tell you something about what we actually do, because most people imagine the wrong thing. They want a fighter jet threading a thunderhead. What it actually is, a turboprop aircraft, 4 engines, roughly the size of a military transport, flown deliberately and methodically into storms at altitudes between 500 and 10,000 feet. It is not nimble. It is exceptionally strong. The crew is 7, pilot, co-pilot, flight meteorologist, navigator, and 3 scientists in the sensor bay. The stakes are not about us. This is the first thing they teach you in the 53rd. The mission is the data. The data is the decision. The decision is the evacuation order. The evacuation order is the 200,000 people who do or do not leave their homes. You are not the story. The storm is not even the story. The data is the story. Cael understood this better than almost anyone I had flown with. When the dropsonde data came in clean, he narrated it. When it came in dirty, he troubleshot with a speed that was genuinely uncomfortable to witness if you weren't expecting it. And when the data told him something the models hadn't predicted, he said so. Directly by 0700, with Vera 180 miles ahead and the outer bands beginning, his laptop was running a continuous update from the NOAA boys and satellite feed, and his expression was the one I had learned to read as, "I was right and I wish I weren't." "Eye wall's starting to contract," he said on the intercom. "Calm. Central pressure dropped 4 millibars in 2 hours. She's going to be a strong 4 by the time we penetrate." I looked at my co-pilot, Major Rien Avila. We both looked at the instruments. "Cael," I said. "Wind radii, inner eye wall, 40 miles, getting tighter and stronger simultaneously." A pause. "Lev, the first penetration is going to be rougher than the brief." The first time he had used my first name on a mission in 12 missions. "Understood," I said. "Crew, we're updating to Category 4 procedures. Call your stations." First eye wall penetration, 0742. The transition from the outer rain bands to the eye wall itself takes approximately 90 seconds, and those 90 seconds have a quality that is definitional. This is a Category 4 hurricane, and you are going to be inside it, and the moment you cross the wall, the aircraft understands this at a structural level. Not failure, not even near failure, but the airframe absorbs energy continuously, and the crew absorbs it, and the instruments track it, and you fly 6 minutes in the wall. Then, the eye of a major hurricane is one of the most disorienting things I have encountered. After the wall, after 6 minutes of everything the storm can offer, the eye is completely still, blue sky sometimes visible above, a circular wall of cloud rising around you on all sides, the aircraft suddenly very quiet. And every time, without exception, there are 4 seconds during which the transition from chaos to stillness happens faster than your nervous system can follow. During those 4 seconds on the first penetration, I heard Cael's voice. Dropsonde 1 away, 2 away, then quieter, not into the intercom, but audible through the thin sensor bay door. "Tell me what you know." He was talking to the instruments, to the data as it came in, to the storm, 12 missions. I knew this about him. It still did what it did. The first pass data confirmed it. Rapid intensification in progress. Central pressure, 939 millibars. Max sustained winds updating to 140 knots. Cael transmitted to the National Hurricane Center, and I heard the duty forecaster say the word "wow" before he caught himself, which tells you exactly what kind of number 939 millibars is in a storm that had been forecast at 946. "NHC wants 2 more passes if we can manage it," Cael said. "We can manage it," I said. "The second penetration is going to be rougher than the first." Eye wall contracted another 2 miles since we entered. "How rough?" A pause that was exactly long enough to be meaningful. "Within parameters," he said. "The parameters are more fully occupied than they were 30 minutes ago." This is what I mean about him. He does not give false comfort. He gives accurate information with appropriate context and lets you make the call with correct inputs. 3 NOAA scientists of this quality in 10 years. Cael is the one whose voice in the intercom had a quality I had no professional terminology for. "Crew, we're going back in," I said. second penetration in 8 minutes. The second penetration was, as Cael had indicated, more fully occupied. The airframe held. The crew held. The instruments stayed in limits, though some of those limits were examined more thoroughly than I would have chosen in advance. Rienne had both hands on the yoke at points where she wouldn't normally have needed them. The sensor bay took more lateral acceleration than a person generally prefers, and I was aware of this in a way that is not standard command awareness of crew safety. Drops on 3 away, 4 away. A pause. 5 had a deploy problem. Retrying. Take your time, I said. Not standard intercom language for an eye wall. I said it anyway. 5 away. Data clean. The eye, the sudden stillness. You all right back there? I said. Define all right, he said. Then, immediately, yes, I'm all right. The data's clean. Good. 4 seconds of silence. Then, are you? 10 years of missions. 12 with this crew. Nobody had ever asked me that in the eye. Yeah, I said. I'm good. Good. A pause. Lev. The third penetration. Central pressure is still dropping. She'll be at or above 135 sustained by the time we go back in. He paused. I want you to have the most current data. Understood. The data suggests it's manageable. The 53rd has penetrated at these intensities before. We have. I know. Quieter. I know you have. There was something in how he said that. Not the data. The thing under the data? Cael, I said. Yeah. We're going to be fine. The longest pause of the flight so far. 6 seconds. I counted. I know that too, he said, and his voice had a quality I had no professional terminology for, and I noted it, and I did not address it because we had a third eye wall penetration to fly, and the data was the mission. We went back in. The third penetration is the one I won't fully describe, because description doesn't capture it, and also because the description is not the point. What I will tell you, Category 4 at 135 knots sustained, is not something you understand until you are in it. The airframe did what it was built to do. The crew did what we were built to do. At a specific moment during the penetration, I heard a sound from the sensor bay, not equipment, not intercom, not the storm. Brief and controlled, the sound of someone who was, for a moment, genuinely frightened. We came through. The eye. Drops on 6, 7, 8 away. Steady, data transmitting. Copy, I said. Rienne looked at me. Sensor bay, I said. Status. Green. A beat. All green. Then, very quietly, not into the intercom. Okay. Just that. Okay? The way someone says okay when they mean something beyond okay and don't have the frequency for it right now. We flew back through the other side. We landed at 12:47, debrief, 90 minutes. The 3-pass profile went directly to NHC, which used it to expand mandatory evacuation zones covering approximately 340,000 additional people along the Louisiana and Mississippi coasts. Hurricane Vera made landfall at 0300 the following morning at 138 knot, sustained winds. Nobody in the expanded evacuation zone was in their home when it hit. That is the mission. That is what the data is for. And also, at 2300, 6 hours later, I was standing in a corridor at Keesler with a coffee cup, and Cael Nori was still in the data room, and I had been standing there for 45 seconds. And the thing I was thinking was not about the mission. I knocked. He looked up, reading glasses on, actually concentrating. Hair doing what happens after 12 hours in a flight helmet. 4 empty coffee cups beside him. He looked at me through the glass with the expression I had been collecting for 20 months and formally categorizing as inconclusive. He got up and opened the door. Lev. You're still in here? Post-storm data is interesting. He stepped back. You want to see. I looked at his laptop. I looked at him. Cael, I said. Yeah. The second pass. In the eye. I paused. You asked if I was all right. He was quiet. Nobody asks that, I said. In 12 missions, in 10 years, nobody asks that in the eye. He took his glasses off, looked at them. At the hinge, the way you look at something you've handled so many times, you know exactly which way it wants to fold. Then back at me. I know, he said. Why did you ask? He considered this with the precision he brought to dropsonde data. Because I wanted to know, he said, and because the eye was the only moment with space to ask it. You planned that? I calculated the appropriate window, yes. The edge of something. I'm a scientist. I looked at him. He looked at me. The data room hummed. The third penetration, I said. When we were coming through the wall, I heard something from the sensor bay. He was very still. Brief, I said. Controlled, not panic. I paused. The sound of someone who was frightened, momentarily. It passed. I know it passed. I could hear that too. I held his gaze. What were you frightened of? He looked at his glasses again, then at me. For approximately 8 seconds, the data suggested we might not come through. Equipment artifact, not actual conditions. It resolved. He said this calmly, which is how he said everything, but the calm was the kind that comes from the other side of something. The data was incorrect, but for 8 seconds. For 8 seconds, the data showed something I didn't want the data to show, because of the mission. A long pause. No, he said. Not because of the mission. There is a specific quality to the silence that follows that kind of sentence. I had been waiting for it for 2 years, without admitting I was waiting. I've been collecting data on a question for approximately 20 months, he said. The confidence interval is high. The sample size is limited because I've been deliberately not running the formal analysis. Why? Because you're the aircraft commander and I'm NOAA contract and the professional framework. Cael does not have natural room for... Cael, he stopped. We're on the ground, I said. The mission is complete. The data is transmitted. 340,000 people are out of their houses. I looked at him. Tell me what the data shows. He was quiet for a long moment. Someone laughed somewhere down the corridor. 2 years, 12 missions, approximately 847 hours of professional proximity. He paused. The data shows that I knocked over one of my coffee cups during the third eye wall penetration and didn't notice until we were in the eye because I was listening to your voice on the intercom. I breathed, and when you said, "We're going to be fine," he paused. The data shows that I believed you, not because the aircraft data supported it, because you said it. Cael. I know what that means, he said, scientifically speaking. What does it mean? It means the variable is not the storm, he said. It's been you for approximately 20 months, initial pattern recognition around Mission 4. You've been tracking this since Mission 4. I track things, he said. It's the job. I put my coffee down on his desk, 3 steps across the data room, which put me approximately 2 feet from him, closer than we had been in 12 missions of shared air and intercom proximity and eye-wall weather. He looked at me. I've been maintaining professional distance, I said. I know. It was very precise. 2 years of it. Yes. It was excessive, I said. In retrospect, he said, yes. I reached out and put my hand over his, where he was still holding his glasses, and his fingers stilled under mine, and the equipment hummed, and outside the Gulf was settling into its post-storm self, and there were 340,000 people along the coast who were somewhere inland and safe, and the mission was complete. We have a mission next week, I said. I know. The mission is the mission. That doesn't change. I know that, he said. That is the data. I understand that. He looked at our hands, then up. But this is also a thing, I said. Yes. He held my gaze. The data suggests it's a very significant thing. I said, I know. And that the sample size, going forward, Cael, I said, will be substantially larger. He paused. Sorry, habit. I looked at him for a moment. Did you just refer to our future as a sample size? I'm a scientist, he said. And then the laugh. The specific, sudden, genuinely delighted one I had been hearing through cockpit doors for 20 months. In the data room, at 2300, 6 hours after landing, with the Gulf settling outside and the storm data glowing on 3 screens behind him, it was substantially better than the intercom version. It turned out to be substantially better in general. There's a NOAA archive that logs every dropsonde deployment with GPS coordinates, timestamp, and mission aircraft ID. For the Hurricane Vera mission, the archive shows 47 successful deployments across 3 passes. Entry 31, dropped in the eye during the second penetration at 0939 UTC, has a note in the remarks field from the science team. Anomalous wind shear reading at 850 MB. Instrument artifact, Data valid. In Cael Nori's personal field journal, Green Notebook, kept since his first Atlantic season, there's an entry from that day. Dropsonde counts, pressure readings, intensity assessment. NHC coordination. Standard, at the bottom, in different ink, the pen he picked up after he landed, after the debrief before he went back to the data room. There are 2 words, data valid. That's all. But scientists are precise, and Cael is more precise than most. And when he writes something in a field journal, he means it exactly the way it reads. The data had been valid for 20 months. It still is.